The city outside Harry's home bustled with early morning activity, but inside it was a haven of warmth and love. Harry woke up with the first light, the soft chirping of birds greeting him through the window. He slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Sarah, who lay peacefully beside him. In the kitchen, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet scent of pancakes on the griddle. He hummed a familiar tune, the notes filling the air with a sense of contentment. As he flipped the pancakes, the kitchen door creaked open. "Good morning, love," Sarah said, her voice still husky from sleep. She wore her robe, hair tousled, yet there was a grace to her every movement. "Morning, beautiful," Harry replied, handing her a steaming cup of coffee. Their fingers touched briefly, a silent exchange of affection. She smiled, a radiant smile that always made Harry's heart swell with happiness. They stood there for a moment, savoring the quiet intimacy before the day fully began. Soon, the pitter-patter of small feet echoed down the hallway, signaling the arrival of their children. Amy, bright-eyed and eager, rushed to the dining table, scattering colorful papers and school supplies in her wake. She was in the middle of a school project, and her enthusiasm was infectious. Sarah joined her, kneeling beside Amy and helping her cut out shapes and glue them onto a poster board. Laughter bubbled up as they worked together, the bond between mother and daughter evident in their shared smiles and gentle teasing. Nearby, Kyle sat at a small table, his crayons spread out around him. He was lost in his own world, his drawings a vibrant tapestry of colors and imagination. Harry glanced at his son's artwork, marveling at the unique perspectives and fantastical creatures that seemed to leap off the page. Harry moved quietly behind Sarah and planted a soft kiss on her cheek. She laughed, a musical sound that made Harry's heart leap. "Watch it, mister," she teased, playfully pushing him away. But the look in her eyes was full of love and happiness. As they settled into the rhythm of the morning, the family room became a hub of activity. Harry set the table, placing pancakes in front of everyone while Sarah poured more coffee. Children chattered excitedly about their plans for the day, their voices overlapping in a joyful symphony. The morning passed in a blur of activity and warmth. Harry felt a deep sense of contentment as he watched his family, the simple routines of their life bringing him immense joy. The day continued, each moment filled with the small joys and challenges of family life. Harry was buried in paperwork at the office, the hum of fluorescent lights above casting a sterile glow on his desk. The buzz of the phone cut through the monotony, jolting him out of his concentration. He answered on the second ring, the urgency in the caller's voice instantly pulling him into a different reality. "Mr. Cohen, this is from the hospital. Your wife, Sarah, has been in an accident. You need to come immediately." The words hit him like a cold splash of water. "What happened?" Harry demanded, already grabbing his coat. "Her car. It went off the road. Please come quickly." Harry's heart raced as he sped through the city, each red light an unbearable delay. The scene at the hospital was chaos, a blur of sterile whites and beeping machines. He was directed to a waiting room, its coldness seeping into his bones as he waited for news. Pacing the length of the corridor, Harry's mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, each one worse than the last. The door opened and a nurse stepped out, her face grave. "Mr. Cohen?" Harry nodded, his throat too tight to speak. "Your wife suffered severe injuries. She's in critical condition. The doctors are doing everything they can." The sterile walls seemed to close in on him. Harry's legs buckled, and he grabbed onto the wall for support. His vision blurred as tears welled up, and the world spun around him. The nurse guided him to a chair, her words a distant echo in the whirlwind of his thoughts. Hours passed in agonizing slowness. Finally, a doctor approached, his expression confirming Harry's worst fears before he even spoke. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Cohen. We did everything we could, but her injuries were too severe. She didn't make it." The news was a physical blow. Harry doubled over, a guttural cry escaping him as the reality settled in. His Sarah, the love of his life, was gone. The funeral was a somber affair, the sky a dull grey that matched the mood of the mourners. Friends and family gathered around Sarah's grave, umbrellas shielding them from a light drizzle. The air was thick with grief, the only sounds the soft murmur of condolences and the occasional sniffle. Amy clung to Harry's hand, her small body trembling with sobs. Kyle stood beside her, his confusion evident as he grasped his sister's other hand tightly. He didn't fully understand what was happening, only that his mother wasn't coming back. Harry's face was a mask of pain as he clutched a single white rose, his final gesture of love for Sarah. He knelt by the grave, placing the rose gently on the coffin before it was lowered into the ground. The sight of the earth covering the coffin was unbearable. Harry turned away, pulling his children close as they walked back to the car. Home was no longer the haven it once was. The vibrant colors and laughter that had filled the rooms were replaced by a heavy silence. Harry wandered through the house in a daze, ending up in Sarah's favorite chair. He held one of her scarves, his fingers tracing the soft fabric. The scent of her perfume lingered, a bittersweet reminder of her presence. Amy tried to console Kyle, who was crying and calling for their mother. She hugged him tightly, whispering soothing words, her own tears falling silently. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her young shoulders, but she bore it with a quiet strength, determined to be there for her brother. Days turned into weeks, and the routine of life resumed, but nothing felt normal. Harry went through the motions, his mind numb with grief. The nights were the worst, the empty space beside him in bed a constant reminder of his loss. He often found himself in Sarah's chair, clutching her scarf, lost in memories. One evening, Amy approached him, her eyes red from crying. "Dad, are we going to be okay?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harry looked at her, seeing the fear and uncertainty in her eyes. He pulled her into a hug, holding her tightly. "We will be, sweetheart," he said, his voice breaking. "We have to be." He knew it would take time, but they would find a way to move forward. For Sarah, for Amy, for Kyle. He had to believe that they could heal, even if the wound would never fully close. Harry's life had become a blur of grief and responsibility. The house, once filled with the warmth of Sarah's presence, felt cold and empty. It was in this state of despair that he met Bridget. It was a rainy afternoon when Harry stumbled into the small cafe, seeking solace in a cup of coffee. Bridget was behind the counter, her vibrant energy a stark contrast to the grayness outside. She noticed him immediately, her eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and empathy. "You look like you could use a friend," she said, sliding a steaming cup of coffee across the counter. Her voice was warm, inviting. Harry looked up, surprised by her directness. "Yeah, you could say that," he replied, his voice tinged with exhaustion. Bridget leaned in, her expression sincere. "Sometimes talking helps. I'm Bridget, by the way." They spent hours talking, Harry finding comfort in her easygoing nature. Bridget listened intently as he spoke about Sarah, his children, and the overwhelming sense of loss that consumed him. She shared stories of her own struggles, creating a bond over shared pain. In the following weeks, Bridget became a constant presence in Harry's life. She had a way of making him feel understood and cared for, something he desperately needed. Her vibrant energy was infectious, and for the first time since Sarah's death, Harry felt a glimmer of hope. One evening, as they sat in the cafe, Harry hesitated before speaking. "Bridget, I've been thinking I could really use your help at home. My kids, they need someone, and so do I." Bridget's eyes softened and she reached out, covering his hand with hers. "Harry, I'd be honored to help. We'll get through this together." Bridget's arrival at the house was a whirlwind. She brought an air of vitality, carrying designer bags and talking animatedly. The house, long steeped in silence, was suddenly alive with her presence. Amy watched silently as Bridget moved around, her discomfort growing. Bridget rearranged Sarah's things, making subtle changes that made the house feel less familiar. Amy felt a pang of sadness as Sarah's scent and touch were gradually erased. "Do you like it?" Bridget asked, stepping back to admire her handiwork. Amy forced a smile. "It's different." Bridget's interactions with Amy and Kyle were polite, but distant. She avoided eye contact with Kyle, her smile never reaching her eyes. Amy noticed the way Bridget's gaze flickered with disdain whenever Kyle tried to engage with her. One morning, as Amy was finishing her breakfast, Bridget handed her a list. "Amy, could you take care of these chores today? It's important to learn responsibility." Amy glanced at the list, her heart sinking. "Sure," she replied, her voice lacking enthusiasm. Bridget smiled, a hint of condescension in her tone. "Good girl." Harry, buried in work and lingering grief, missed these subtle signs. He saw Bridget as a lifeline, someone who could help him navigate this difficult time. Her presence allowed him to focus on his job, easing the burden he carried. "Bridget, I don't know how to thank you," Harry said one evening, exhaustion evident in his voice. "Harry, there's no need to thank me. We're in this together," she replied, her smile warm, but her eyes calculating. As days turned into weeks, Amy's suspicion grew. She noticed how Bridget's demeanor changed when Harry wasn't around. The disdainful glances at Kyle, the way she dismissed his attempts to communicate. It was as if Kyle was an inconvenience, a burden she barely tolerated. One evening, Amy confronted Bridget. "Why do you treat Kyle like that?" Bridget's smile was cold. "Amy, you're too young to understand. I'm doing what's best for all of us." Amy's jaw tightened. "He's my brother. He deserves to be treated with respect." Bridget's eyes flashed with irritation. "You need to focus on your chores and let me handle things." Feeling helpless, Amy complied, but the weight of Bridget's disapproval grew heavier each day. She felt trapped, unable to protect Kyle from the subtle cruelty that lurked beneath Bridget's pleasant facade. Harry, meanwhile, remained oblivious. He was grateful for Bridget's support, blind to the undercurrents of tension within his own home. He clung to the belief that Bridget's presence was a blessing, a beacon of hope in their dark times. Harry's bedroom was a flurry of activity. An open suitcase lay on the bed, half-packed with clothes and essentials. Harry moved around the room, his mind preoccupied with the details of his upcoming work trip. Amy and Kyle sat on the edge of the bed, watching silently. "Are you sure you have to go, Dad?" Amy asked, her voice tinged with worry. Harry paused, looking at his daughter. "I wish I didn't have to, Amy, but this trip is important for my job." He walked over and hugged her tightly. "I promise I'll be back before you know it, and I'll bring you and Kyle some cool souvenirs." Kyle looked up, his big eyes full of uncertainty. "Will you bring me a dinosaur, Dad?" Harry smiled, ruffling Kyle's hair. "Absolutely, buddy. The biggest one I can find." Bridget stood at the doorway, her smile bright but her eyes cold and distant. "We'll manage just fine while you're away, Harry," she said, her fingers tapping impatiently against the doorframe. Harry glanced at her, and then back at his children. You listen to Bridget and behave, okay? I'll call every day to check on you. He hugged Amy and Kyle one last time, their small arms clinging to him. As he walked out the door, he looked back, the weight of leaving his family evident in his eyes. Bridget waved him off, her smile never reaching her eyes. A week later, the household had settled into an uneasy routine. Bridget took charge, her authority felt in every corner of the house. The children missed their father, but they tried to adapt. Then, one afternoon, the phone rang. Bridget picked up the receiver, her face turning pale as she listened. Yes, I understand. Thank you for informing me. She hung up the phone, her eyes gleaming with an unsettling mix of shock and opportunity. She gathered Amy and Kyle in the living room, her voice calm and composed. I have some difficult news. Your father's boat had an accident. He's missing. Amy's heart stopped. What? No, he can't be. Tears streamed down her face as she tried to process the news. Kyle looked confused, clutching Amy's hand tightly. What does missing mean, Amy? Amy struggled to find words. It means, we don't know where he is, Kyle. Bridget watched them, her expression carefully neutral. I know this is hard, but we must stay strong. We'll hope for the best and prepare for whatever comes next. In the days that followed, Bridget's true colors began to show. She started making plans to send Kyle to an institution, justifying it to Amy as what's best for him. He needs special care, Amy, Bridget said one evening, her tone condescending. You can't handle him on your own. Amy felt a cold knot of fear in her stomach. But Kyle needs to be with family. I can take care of him. Bridget shook her head, a patronizing smile on her lips. You're just a child yourself. Trust me. This is for the best. Amy didn't know how to fight back. She felt the growing pressure and helplessness as Bridget began to isolate her, giving her more chores and limiting her interactions with friends. One afternoon, Amy found herself scrubbing the kitchen floor, her hands raw from the harsh cleaning chemicals. Bridget stood over her, her voice dripping with false kindness. You're doing a great job, Amy. See, learning responsibility isn't so bad. Amy clenched her teeth, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. She missed her father desperately and felt the crushing weight of Bridget's manipulation. She knew she had to find a way to protect Kyle and herself, but she felt so alone and powerless. Bridget continued to make plans behind Amy's back, consulting with institutions and making arrangements. Amy overheard snippets of phone conversations, her heart sinking with each passing day. One evening, Amy sat with Kyle in their room, the weight of their situation pressing down on her. Kyle looked at her with innocent eyes, not fully understanding the gravity of what was happening. When will Dad come back, Amy? Amy hugged him tightly, her voice breaking. I don't know, Kyle, but I promise I'll do everything I can to keep us together. As the days turned into weeks, the shadow of Harry's absence loomed large. Amy resolved to stay vigilant, knowing she had to find a way to stand up to Bridget and protect her brother. The struggle was just beginning, and Amy braced herself for the battles ahead. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the computer in Amy's room. The glow from the screen cast a determined light on her face as she typed furiously, eyes scanning page after page of information. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, searching for legal options and support services. She needed a plan to protect Kyle, and she needed it now. Amy glanced at the clock. It was well past midnight. She rubbed her eyes, the weight of exhaustion pulling at her, but she couldn't afford to stop. The more she read, the clearer her path became. She had to take action before Bridget could carry out her plan to institutionalize Kyle. Taking a deep breath, Amy quietly opened her drawer and pulled out a small, old tin box. Inside was her savings, carefully stashed away over the years. She withdrew the money, counting it meticulously before hiding it back under her bed. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. Amy turned back to her computer, her mind racing with possibilities. She started making a plan to escape, listing essential items and important documents they would need. She packed a backpack with the basics: clothes, toiletries, and a few sentimental items. She made sure to include Kyle's favorite toys and their mother's photo album, knowing how much they meant to him. "Kyle," she whispered, entering his room where he slept peacefully. "We're going on an adventure." Kyle stirred, rubbing his eyes. "An adventure?" "Yes," Amy said, her voice steady. "Just you and me. We're going to a special place where we'll be safe and happy." Kyle's face brightened with excitement. "Like in the stories?" "Exactly," Amy smiled, though her heart ached with fear and uncertainty. "Just like in the stories." The next day, Amy's resolve hardened. She overheard Bridget on the phone, her voice low and conspiratorial. "Yes, it's all arranged. He'll be taken care of by the end of the week." Amy's blood ran cold. She had to act fast. That evening, when Bridget was busy in the kitchen, Amy approached her. "Bridget, we need to talk," she said, her voice firm. Bridget looked up, annoyance flashing in her eyes. "What is it now?" "Amy, I know what you're planning," Amy said, her heart pounding. "You're not sending Kyle away." Bridget's expression changed, her mask slipping to reveal a sharp and cruel demeanor. "You don't understand, Amy. This is for his own good. You can't take care of him." Amy stood her ground, her voice shaking but resolute. "He's my brother. I will take care of him." Bridget's eyes flashed with anger. "You're just a child. You don't get to make these decisions." Amy felt a surge of defiance. "I'm more capable than you think, and I won't let you take him from me." Bridget stepped closer, her voice a hiss. "You're making a big mistake, Amy. You can't win this." Amy's heart raced, but she didn't back down. "We'll see about that." That night, Amy waited until Bridget was asleep. The house was silent, the darkness pressing in around her. She quietly woke Kyle, helping him gather his things. "Is it time for our adventure?" Kyle asked, his voice a sleepy whisper. "Yes, it's time," Amy replied, trying to keep her voice steady. "We have to be very quiet, okay?" Kyle nodded, his trust in her absolute. Amy led him through the house, their footsteps silent on the carpeted floors. She grabbed the packed backpack and led Kyle out the door, casting one last glance back at the house that had been their home. They walked quickly to the bus station, the cool night air biting at their skin. Amy kept Kyle close, her heart pounding with every step. They bought tickets with her precious savings and boarded a late-night bus, the city lights fading behind them as they headed towards an uncertain but hopeful future. Kyle leaned against her, his eyes wide with excitement. "Where are we going?" "To Grandma's old house," Amy said softly. "It's in the countryside. We'll be safe there." Kyle smiled, his fear melting away. "I can't wait." As the bus rumbled on, Amy stared out the window, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had taken the first step in their journey, but she knew the road ahead would be difficult. The countryside welcomed Amy and Kyle with a peaceful silence, broken only by the distant chirping of birds. The old, quaint house stood at the end of a gravel path, its faded paint and overgrown garden bearing witness to years gone by. Amy unlocked the door, pushing it open with a creak. and they stepped into a space filled with memories. The house was dusty, the air thick with the scent of age and nostalgia. Sunlight filtered through the grimy windows, casting a golden hue on the old wooden floors. Amy and Kyle stood in the entrance, taking in the scene before them. "This is it, Kyle," Amy said softly, squeezing her brother's hand. "Our new home." Kyle's eyes roamed the room, wide with wonder. "It's big," he said, his voice echoing in the empty space. Amy nodded, a small smile playing on her lips. "Let's explore." They moved from room to room, uncovering remnants of the past. The walls were lined with old family photos and memorabilia, telling stories of generations before them. Amy found comfort in these relics, feeling a connection to her roots that she had long forgotten. She gently dusted off a photograph of her grandmother, the woman who had once called this place home. "This was Grandma's favorite spot," Amy said, pointing to a cozy corner by the window. "She used to sit here and knit." Kyle wandered off, his curiosity leading him to a large window overlooking the garden. He set up his painting station there, arranging his supplies with care. The sunlight streamed in, casting a warm glow on his face and illuminating his artwork. "This is perfect," Kyle murmured, already lost in his world of colors and shapes. As days turned into weeks, Amy and Kyle settled into their new routine. Amy found work at a local cafe, a quaint little place run by Mrs. Thompson, a kind-hearted woman with a warm smile. "Good morning, Amy," Mrs. Thompson greeted her on her first day. "Welcome to our little family." Amy smiled, grateful for the opportunity. "Thank you, Mrs. Thompson. I'm happy to be here." Each morning, Amy woke up early to make breakfast for Kyle. They sat together at the kitchen table, the morning light spilling in and filling the room with a soft glow. Amy would then walk through the quaint town, greeting familiar faces along the way. The locals were kind and supportive, their warmth a balm to her weary soul. Kyle adjusted to his new school with surprising ease. The school was small and welcoming, with teachers who were patient and understanding. They helped him integrate into the class, ensuring he felt comfortable and included. Kyle made friends with a boy named Tom, who shared his love for drawing. "Look, Amy," Kyle said one afternoon, holding up a picture he had drawn with Tom. "We drew the garden together." Amy's heart swelled with pride. "It's beautiful, Kyle. You're really talented." The new environment proved to be a catalyst for Kyle's growth. His paintings became more vivid and expressive, each one a testament to his blossoming creativity. He drew scenes from their new life, capturing the beauty of the countryside with a keen eye for detail. Amy found solace in Kyle's happiness. Every time she saw his latest creation, her heart filled with pride. She hung his drawings around the house, creating a gallery of their journey. Each picture told a story, a visual diary of their new chapter together. "Kyle, your artwork is amazing," Amy said one evening, hanging another drawing on the wall. "I'm so proud of you." Kyle beamed, his eyes shining with joy. "Thanks, Amy. I love it here." The bond between Amy and Kyle grew stronger with each passing day. They navigated their new life together, finding strength in each other. Amy took comfort in the small routines they established, the quiet moments of togetherness that made the house feel like a home. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Amy and Kyle sat on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of pink and orange. The air was cool, carrying the scent of blooming flowers. "Do you think Dad will find us here?" Kyle asked quietly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Amy put her arm around him, pulling him close. "Maybe one day, Kyle. But for now we have each other. And that's enough." Kyle nodded, resting his head on her shoulder. "I'm glad we're here, Amy." "Me too," Amy replied, her voice filled with a quiet determination. "We're going to be okay." The local park was bustling with activity, families and street performers filling the air with a lively energy. Laughter echoed through the trees, mingling with the melodies of a nearby musician playing the violin. Amy and Kyle were in the midst of it all, setting up a small booth for Kyle's art display. "Careful with that one," Amy said, her tone warm but firm. She handed Kyle a painting, her eyes gleaming with pride. Kyle took the painting with careful hands, his eyes shining with excitement. He placed it on an easel, adjusting it until it was perfectly centered. "How's that?" he asked, looking up at Amy. "Perfect," Amy replied, giving him an encouraging smile. She stood by, ready to support him and interact with potential buyers. The park was vibrant, a perfect setting for Kyle to showcase his work. As people strolled by, many stopped to admire Kyle's paintings. Their faces lit up with appreciation, and Kyle shyly accepted compliments, his confidence growing with each kind word. "These are wonderful," an older woman said, examining a painting of the countryside. "You have a real talent, young man." "Thank you," Kyle replied softly, a shy smile on his face. Amy's heart swelled with pride as she watched her brother interact with the admirers. Among the passers-by, a distinguished-looking man with a kind face stopped by Kyle's booth. He wore a neatly pressed suit, and his eyes sparkled with curiosity. He paused in front of one painting, his expression thoughtful. "This one," the man said, pointing to a painting of a man standing by a river. "It looks familiar." The man's eyes widened as he examined the painting more closely. Memories seemed to flood back, and he turned to Amy and Kyle, his voice warm and genuine. "My name is Mr. Lewis. I used to know someone very well who looked just like this." Amy felt a flicker of hope, but remained cautious. "I'm Amy, and this is my brother Kyle. Our father Harry went missing some time ago." Mr. Lewis's gaze softened. "Harry Cohen? I was a close friend and colleague of his. He spoke of you too often." Amy's eyes filled with tears. "We've been through a lot since he disappeared. We're doing our best to stay strong." Mr. Lewis nodded, his resolve clear. "Harry was a good man. If there's a chance he's still out there, I want to help. Tell me everything you know about what happened." As Amy recounted the events leading up to Harry's disappearance, Mr. Lewis listened intently, his mind racing with possibilities. He asked detailed questions, piecing together the fragments of information Amy provided. "I remember the last time I saw Harry," Mr. Lewis said thoughtfully. "He was excited about a new project, but he seemed distracted, almost like he had something weighing on his mind." Amy nodded. "He mentioned a work trip just before he disappeared. We've had no leads since then." Mr. Lewis's eyes narrowed with determination. "I have contacts in the industry who might know more. I'll start making calls and see what I can find out." Amy felt a surge of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We need all the help we can get." Kyle, who had been quietly listening, looked up at Mr. Lewis with hopeful eyes. "Do you think Dad's okay?" Mr. Lewis knelt to Kyle's level, his expression kind. "I can't make any promises, Kyle, but I believe there's always hope. Your father is a strong man. If there's a way for him to come back to you, we'll find it." Over the next few days, Mr. Lewis worked tirelessly, contacting old colleagues and friends, piecing together information about Harry's last known whereabouts. He was determined to reunite the family, his resolve strengthening with each new clue he uncovered. Every evening, Mr. Lewis would visit Amy and Kyle, sharing updates and discussing their next steps. The bond between them grew, rooted in their shared goal of finding Harry. One evening, Mr. Lewis arrived with a stack of old documents and maps. "I found something interesting," he said, spreading the papers out on the table. "These are records of Harry's last project. It seems he was investigating something quite significant." As they pored over the documents together, Amy felt a renewed sense of determination. With Mr. Lewis's help, they were making progress. The journey to find their father was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, Amy felt that they were on the right path. The bond with Mr. Lewis gave her strength, and she knew they would face whatever lay ahead together. Mr. Lewis sat in his dimly lit office, the glow from his computer screen casting long shadows on the walls. The room was cluttered with papers, maps, and documents, each one a piece of the puzzle he was determined to solve. He had spent countless hours reaching out to old contacts, making calls, and piecing together clues about Harry's whereabouts. His phone buzzed on the desk, and he answered it quickly. "Lewis here." "It's Bill. I found something." Harry was seen in a small village up north, near the old mill. "It might be worth checking out." Mr. Lewis's heart skipped a beat. "Thanks, Bill. I'll follow up on it right away." He hung up and turned back to his desk, spreading out a map of the area. His excitement was palpable, each new lead bringing him closer to the truth. Late into the night, he reviewed the maps and documents, tracing Harry's last known movements. The more he uncovered, the more convinced he became that Harry was still out there, somewhere. He meticulously documented every detail, knowing that any piece of information could be crucial. The next day, Mr. Lewis visited Amy and Kyle. They gathered around the kitchen table, the air thick with anticipation. "I've found something," Mr. Lewis said, unfolding the map. "Harry was last seen in a remote village near an old mill." Amy's eyes widened with hope. "Do you really think he's there?" Mr. Lewis nodded. "It's our best lead yet. I'm going to check it out." The journey to the remote village was long and arduous. Mr. Lewis drove through winding roads, the lush greenery of the countryside providing a serene backdrop. The village was quaint and isolated, a cluster of small houses surrounded by fields and forests. He parked his car and began to ask around, showing villagers a photograph of Harry. Most shook their heads, but an old woman recognized him. "Yes, I know him," she said. "He's been living here, working in the workshop by the river. He doesn't remember much about his past." Mr. Lewis's heart pounded with anticipation. He followed the woman's directions to a small workshop. Inside, the air was filled with the scent of wood and varnish. A man was working at a bench, his hands skilled, but his eyes distant. "Harry?" Mr. Lewis called softly. The man turned, his eyes blank at first, but then a flicker of recognition. "Do I know you?" Mr. Lewis approached cautiously, his heart in his throat. He pulled out photos of Amy and Kyle, handing them to Harry. "These are your children, Harry. Amy and Kyle. They've been looking for you." Harry took the photos, his hands trembling. He stared at them, and slowly memories began to surface. Tears welled up in his eyes as he recognized their faces. "My kids." Mr. Lewis felt a surge of relief. "Yes, Harry. They've missed you so much. We need to get you home." Over the next few days, Mr. Lewis helped Harry piece together his memories. They talked about the past, about Sarah, and about the life Harry had before the accident. Each conversation brought Harry a step closer to his old self, his strength and confidence slowly returning. "We need to surprise them," Mr. Lewis suggested. "It'll be a wonderful reunion." Harry agreed, his heart aching with longing for his children. They made plans for the journey back, Mr. Lewis handling the logistics, while Harry prepared himself for the emotional reunion. The drive back to the countryside house was filled with a mix of emotions. Hope, anxiety, and anticipation swirled in Harry's mind. He clutched the photos of Amy and Kyle, drawing strength from their faces. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the garden of the countryside house. Amy and Kyle were outside, enjoying the cool evening air. Amy sat on the porch steps, lost in thought, while Kyle chased fireflies, his laughter ringing through the air. A car pulled up the gravel path, its tires crunching on the stones. Amy looked up, her heart skipping a beat as she saw Mr. Lewis step out. But it wasn't him who caught her attention. It was the man who followed, his eyes scanning the yard. "Dad?" Amy whispered, her voice barely audible. Harry's eyes met hers and he nodded, a mixture of hope and fear on his face. Amy's heart leapt as she ran towards him, tears streaming down her face. "Dad!" Harry opened his arms, and Amy threw herself into them, sobbing. Kyle, realizing what was happening, ran over, his face lighting up with pure joy. "Daddy!" Harry knelt down, wrapping his arms around both of his children. "I'm here. I'm home." The embrace was tight, the long separation melting away in an instant. Tears flowed freely as they clung to each other, the pain of the past months giving way to overwhelming relief. Back in the bustling city, Harry knew there was one more confrontation to be had. He walked into his old home, the house that had been tainted by Bridget's presence. She was sitting in the living room, her face paling as she saw him enter. "Harry! You're back!" Bridget stammered, her voice trembling. Harry's eyes were cold and unforgiving. "I'm back, Bridget, and I know everything." Bridget tried to justify her actions, her voice desperate. "I was just trying to take care of the kids. You were gone and they needed someone." "Save it," Harry interrupted, his voice like ice. "You betrayed us. You tried to tear my family apart for your own gain." Bridget's face crumpled, her attempts to explain falling flat. She knew she had lost. Without another word, she began packing her belongings, her movements hurried and frantic. As she left the house, the door closing behind her, Harry felt a weight lift. The house felt lighter, free from her toxic presence. He took a deep breath, knowing that this was the beginning of a new chapter for him and his children. The family moved back to their home, now filled with warmth and hope. The house was decorated with Kyle's paintings, each one a testament to their journey and resilience. The walls, once barren and cold, now burst with color and life, each piece of art telling a story of survival and love. Amy prepared for university, her dreams reignited. She studied hard, determined to make her father proud. She spent evenings at the kitchen table, books spread out before her, a look of fierce determination on her face. "You've got this, Amy," Harry said one evening, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I'm so proud of you." Amy smiled up at him, her heart swelling with love. "Thanks, Dad. I couldn't have done it without you." Kyle continued to flourish in the new environment, his paintings becoming even more vivid and expressive. Each day, he brought new artwork to add to their collection, his joy evident in every brushstroke. One evening, the family sat together in the garden, the air filled with the scent of blooming flowers. They talked about the future, their voices filled with hope and excitement. "I want to become a teacher," Amy said, her eyes shining. "I want to help kids the way you've helped me, Dad." Harry's heart swelled with pride. "You'll be amazing, Amy. I know it." Kyle looked up from his drawing, a smile on his face. "I want to be an artist, just like now." "You already are, Kyle," Harry said, ruffling his son's hair. and you're going to do great things." As they sat there, the sun setting behind them, the family felt a deep sense of peace. They had been through so much, but they had come out stronger, their bonds unbreakable. The future was bright, and they were ready to face it together. Thank you for following this touching story. Though full of challenges and pain, it ultimately proves that God always blesses good people. We see that everything happens for a reason, and through those difficulties, happiness can be found. Always believe that when you live well and patiently, happiness will come to you. Remember, every challenge in life is a stepping stone to something better. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any meaningful stories. What do you think about their journey and the hardships they endured? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you, and see you in the next videos.